Well, we've got a hot topic now because we just looked at a video where we asked the question, drag queens and children, is that appropriate? Should they be interacting, doing story time at the library? But I want to now, we've been doing this with our part 2, our second segment, which is drag queens and the Christian perspective. Like, what do we think? And we want to start by sort of deconstructing or talking about the cliche sort of typical conservative response that we're not necessarily wanting to fall into that. And I'm going to have Andrew kick it off because that he thought we should start with that. So I'm going to let him kind of kick things off because I do think that is an assumption so many people are going to make. They're going to see the thumbnail and title and be like, just going to be a couple of angry Christians about, people dressing in drag.
Yeah, and that is absolutely not the case, and it's not what we're about. It's, not that I'm preaching the gospel of tolerance in any way, but at the same time, but we live in a post-Christian world, as you mentioned when we were off camera prior to this segment, and so our response has to be a little bit more nuanced to these things. I don't think anyone who comes from a more traditional standpoint, a little bit more conservative moral standpoint, not conservative political, conservative moral standpoint, there's really no debate on the the right and the wrong really of this. I don't think, at least from my perspective, but there is, I think, a lot of error in the response of most of the Christian community, at least the conservative Christian community. And that's just, that's wrong. Let's kick these people back out of society where they belong. They have no right to be here. That's weird. Right. All that stuff. I mean, we just have to do a better job in general. And I hesitate to even say the word we, because I don't necessarily connect myself, and I don't think you do, with the ultra right political, reactionary, mob either, because that's another extreme mob, and there's a lot of problematic associations on that front. We're trying to be sort of as objective as we can be here while still clinging to a biblical faith. So in deconstructing kind of the typical traditionalist response, I would say where we have to stop and where we have to check ourselves is like, hold on a second here. These are human beings whom Jesus died for just as much as you and I who believe.
Yeah.
They are no more or less loved by God than you or I. And they are viewed no differently by God than you or I, save for faith in Jesus. That's it.
Yeah.
So there's no moral high ground for us to look down upon these people and treat them as less than human or whatever, man. And WWJD it. I love WWJD, by the way. That went away a long time ago. I'm bringing it back because I think about situations all the time where I'm like, okay, how would he attack this situation? How would he deal with this person? I mean, he would look them in the eyes and go up and speak to them in such a way that's so truthful, but so caring, but so cutting to the heart of the matter, addressing their need for acceptance, the wounds they have from their childhood, any sort of mental things that are going on that, are being manifested in the desire to dress as the opposite sex, which is, something that is rooted probably not in healthy things spiritually. Let's just put it out there. Yeah. I don't see an angle to the argument as to whether or not, and that's kind of bleeding into, a question we're going to delve into later in the segment, but I don't see an angle here where there isn't a connection between deep wounding, perhaps some mental illness, and this type of alternative lifestyle. So those are my initial thoughts, but the deconstruction is just this. Christians and conservatives and traditionalists get labeled as bigots and hate-filled hate mongers or whatever for a good reason, because a lot of times the people that come from that perspective are coming from a position of hate and a moral high ground.
Yep.
Trying to do what humans do.
Mhm.
put other people down to elevate themselves, to make themselves feel better. And that's also what's going on the other side of the fence. There, it's a different play out. It's a different equation, but it's a similar conclusion. Human beings just want to feel better. We just want to feel better. And the world that we live in right now is toxic.
Yeah.
It's toxic in terms of what we consume mentally. It's toxic in terms of what we consume spiritually. It's toxic in terms of what we consume physically.
Yeah.
Our entire world is toxic, and therefore there are a lot of hurting people out there at this time in the world. And it's not surprising that the post-Christian era talk is connected to an era where it seems that people are coming apart at the seams more and more, society itself and individuals. So I'll kick it back to you. Deconstruct the conservative response.
Yeah, the thing that came to my mind was we're supposed to be salt and light, and I think so often conservatives and Christians show up as sticks and stones. Like, we don't show up as salt and light. We're the sticks and the stones. We're name calling. We're nasty. We refer to folks that are, transgendered or homosexual or people that want to do drag, and we use terms and expressions like they're gross or we don't want to be around them. And I find that to be so odd, because I was reading through a devotional book and it was talking about the antidote for revenge is seeing that you don't have the moral high ground. Because revenge or desiring vengeance, it's seeing yourself as if like you're in some superior place, and you use that expression, moral high ground. If the tenets of our faith and what we believe is that we are horrible and reprehensible and deserving of judgment, and yet we place our faith in a higher power to save us, where does moral high ground come from if that's your starting position? That it's antithetical to the gospel to think that you're in a moral superior position. And we don't believe in moralism, right? Like, that's another, I think, problem, is that the West has largely infected Christian thought and turned it into moralism. So when something is immoral, it is the enemy, because that's then what you're supposed to be fighting against. We're not trying to Christianify culture. We're not trying to moralify culture. We should be engaging with culture. It doesn't serve a purpose to just, and it's easy and it's cheap to just say, well, this is what I believe, that's wrong. Okay, fine. Is anybody in any doubt, like, what Christians think about homosexual marriage or transgenderism? Or
we don't have to debate that,
right? Like, thanks. Are you cool with adultery and divorce and lying? Like, do we need to make sure and say that too? Like, I would think that the harder work and the more difficult thing would be to try to engage with people. I would much rather have a conversation with somebody to seek understanding and empathy, to say, what drove you to desire this so much? Why is this giving you meaning and a sense of fulfillment? So that, number one, I can better understand it. And then I would hope that I could speak into that. And I know that sounds like, oh, well, you that sounds sort of like you're trying to save them from something, or you're trying to, well, yeah, that's kind of the point of what we believe, is we're wanting to make people, or we're wanting to help people, I should say, see the truth, see the light. We're wanting them to live better and to flourish, because that's what we believe. We believe that this is the way, the truth, and the life. Well, I'm not going to do that with sticks and stones and judgment. And I think that Western Christianity has fallen more into that category, and it's a lot harder to be salt and light, because that takes work. It's not cheap. It's not a passing blow. It takes effort and love and compassion, and those are things that are so foreign to us. It's not instinctive to be that way. So that I think it's good to start there, because it doesn't. What do two Christian guys think about drag queens? Who cares what we think about that to a certain degree? Like, that's not that important in this in the larger discussion, I think, of cultural engagement, which I believe is lacking right now.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about it in terms of just on an individual level here, right? You mentioned asking questions and trying to build a bridge. That doesn't happen with the person at the checkout counter.
Yeah.
Like, you can't just, cold question someone that you don't know. What would genuinely be required is building rapport with an individual, and that takes time.
Yeah.
So you might actually have to make friends with someone that you don't agree with their lifestyle. Weird concept, right? But we all feel uncomfortable with that, don't we?
Yeah.
Because we're so in our tribes, whether we admit it or not. We are. I am. You are. Let's think about this. You're at Starbucks and the person who's helping you, is a trans person, or is dressed in drag, or is some other representation of a group that you probably have, or you do have a moral disagreement, a spiritual disagreement with, but that's still a person. You know what I mean? And we're supposed to be, when you say engaging, we're supposed to be out there building relationships with these people and making them feel loved. Not loved in the tolerate, anything goes sense, but in the person to person humanity sense. And there's a difference.
Yep.
And we can debate, and this gets back to that deconstruction thing. What is loving people?
Yeah.
What does it mean to love those around you? What does it mean to love those that you disagree with? What does it mean to love your enemies? How does that look on a day-to-day basis? I'm still figuring that out, obviously, and so are you. We spoke in the last episode. How do you love people that trashed you publicly and ruined your career and threatened your family on purpose, unrepentantly? Wow, that's hard. That's hard. It's also hard to love people who you don't understand, like, why they live the way they live.
Yeah.
And that was my reaction to the video. It's like, I don't understand this. The only conclusion I can come to is that, and I'm going to be super frank here, I think there's a spiritual sickness that is shrouding over society, especially in America. We are the linchpin of the world at this point, because if we can turn the ship in America one way or the other, it's going to sway the whole planet. And that's why so much of this is happening in our world. And this is every issue: immigration, education, media, commerce, all of it. So I'm touching on a lot of different things here, but getting back to the idea of what is love, and I almost started laughing right there because there's that Night at the Roxbury song. And
I heard it. When you said what is love, I heard that too. I was like, oh.
My daughter is obsessed with that song right now because she thinks it's the funniest song she's ever heard. And I'm like, yeah, you're my daughter. Like, I'm the type that walks around the house singing that song on purpose just to annoy people.
Well, and I like that you bring up love, because something in that book on forgiveness that he touches on is cheap grace, and how, just forgive and forget and get over it. Like, that's just cheap grace. And I think there's such a thing as
not real.
Well, I think there's such a thing as cheap love. This idea that you just love someone and let them do whatever they want, total acceptance, total tolerance, that's cheap love. That's not active.
That's not love.
That's not seeking someone's good or their betterment. You're just sort of hands off, do whatever you want, right?
Love is getting in the dirt. It's sacrifice. It's tension. It's arguments. It's debating of ideas. It's telling someone else, I'm willing to accept you, warts and all, even if I disagree with certain parts of your life or your personality or whatever, your character, blah, 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 blah. It's getting in the dirt with them. And that's why church is so hard. Yeah. Because we are supposed to be living out this thing in community together, and that is iron sharpening iron. That's a painful, difficult process of humbling thyself in terms of how you relate to other humans. I want to believe that I know everything. I want to believe I'm smarter than everybody else. I want to believe that nobody can tell me what to do. Nobody can tell me how to dress. Nobody can tell me what to think. And I'm defiant. I'm going to do what I want. I'm an individual. I'm an American. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But there's no room in any of this for any of that stuff.
Well, and
so to love someone else, you got to die to yourself first. I don't think you're capable of loving someone else until you learn to die to yourself first. Go.
Yeah, and think of it in the realm of fierce love would be confrontational at certain moments, and fierce love would be willing to risk comfort and willing to risk the peace to say, I'm going to say this. I'm going to push against what you believe or what you think. And the thing that I think of every time is children. My love for my children constantly has me pushing back on what they think and what they want. And why do we think we get to the point where that's no longer needed or good for our lives? You should just be able to do whatever you want and live however you want. And loving you is just tolerating that, not pushing back. It's like, what? So you've arrived at such a state that nobody should ever push back on what you're doing with your life? Like so we just hands off. What, at the age of 18? It's cool, man. Go for it. Live however you want. You've now gotten to a place where you no longer need any active voices or boundaries or anything. And we're seeing this play out right now in society. The liberation movement for sex and the ability to just sleep around and do whatever you want and embrace this sort of very liberal, open sexual ethic, the repercussions are coming home to roost. The cognitive dissonance in culture right now that I see is this idea that women should be empowered to do whatever they want and be super sexual and make money in the adult content world, or sex work is work, right? But at the same time, the cognitive dissonance is we're also angry that that's how men view women and that's how men treat women. It's like, but I don't understand. You're claiming two different things. Like, you want to contribute to a machine that tells the male brain women are objects to be consumed, and then you're angry when the male brain does that. It's a cognitive dissonance. And when I look at the situation with drag queens and children, there's a cognitive dissonance there. On one hand, you're saying that you're seeking the good of the child, but it's so self-referential. It's so self-focused. That can't be love. That can't be seeking the good of the child. You're seeking your good. You're seeking what's best for you. And,
yes, and that's the problem.
And that's why I get protective. It's like, wait. We're talking about children. They're so impressionable. They're so delicate, and they're being formed before your eyes. Like, my daughter says things just like my wife. It's like my wife is thumbprinted some of her sass into my daughter. And obviously it frustrates my wife because it's like she sees herself in some of that. And that's kind of adorable, also kind of frustrating when your kid's giving you an attitude. But just think about that. Just being in proximity to my wife. My wife's a pistol. She doesn't give you any BS. She shoots straight. She's a fierce woman, and I love that about her. And that's already sort of imprinted on my daughter, and my daughter is 9. And you have to consider that in these situations. So impressionable. They're moldable like clay. And we can't let our guard down and act like, yeah, it's totally fine. And that's not me saying, ooh, spooky devil drag queens, keep them away from the poor children. This is not appropriate at this age, right?
And that's all that needs to be said. That's all that needs to be said.
Right.
And if that's what we're debating, it doesn't have to go past that. Again, the problem comes back to, in our society right now, is everybody's pushing for everybody else to adopt their thing. And there's a war for what ideologies are going to win. And that is different than eras past in America. Mm-hmm. And it's fracturing everything we know to be true. That and the real ailment in society is the fact that you've got the people running it are all of one accord in terms of their actual real agenda. Most of them. We're talking the swamp here. You get into office and you exploit the people to make as much money off of them without caring about the country or the people at all. That's what's happening. And they're all working together. It's so corrupt to push whatever agenda allows them to make the most money while they're in office. And that's all that matters. And it's at the expense of everybody else. And until we change that in our society, all of these peripheral issues that we're debating are a little bit moot.
Yeah.
I know that's a sidebar, complete sidebar, but there seems to be a very systematic, I don't want to say systematic. There is a lot of battles being fought on different fronts, and there's a lot of intentionality with a lot of these things. And there's a lot of big picture thinking behind all of it. And the conclusion I keep coming to is that traditionalism is under fire from every angle. And it is politically and globalistically motivated. And I just want to throw this out. This is something I do believe in really strongly. The traditional nuclear family is the building block of society, with the man as the leader, the woman as supporter, embracing true masculinity, true femininity, and raising their kids to embrace, their God-given sexuality and quote-unquote gender identity. That formula as the building block of society worked very well when we were building our country. And also being connected to one nation under God as a concept caused America to flourish and thrive more than any country or any empire in history in many ways. And now we want, as a society, to destroy that building block. Well, if you're going to destroy that building block, you better replace it with something better. And what I see emerging, this dissection of, or not, this destruction, not dissection, of, traditionalism in every form, is not going to lead us to a better place as a society.
And as you're saying that, this idea of combating traditionalism, traditional values, it starts to feel like gaslighting to me. You're trying to get the conservatives wound up like a bunch of Neanderthals, so they go and they get angry and they'll say all this stuff, and that's what you want. You're intentionally,
see, they're bigots,
right? You're intentionally pushing this button, knowing you can gaslight the conservatives, gaslight the right wing. Oh, I got an idea. Let's have drag parties with children. That'll really get them wound up and angry. Like, I'm not saying that's why they're doing it, but that's what it feels like. It's like, this feels like gaslighting. It's like you're getting everybody angry, so then you can say, yeah, look, see how terrible and mean and awful they are. And that's why it doesn't feel like it's done in good faith. Like there's like something
it feels
else
like
going on.
Button pushing, like pride parades. It's the same idea. It's button pushing. It's I could see people in the background who are participating going, "Oh, watch this! I'm going to do this. Wait do you see these these conservatives' heads fall off when we do this? I can't wait to see the looks on their faces." You know what I mean? There's an anger to it. There's an edge to it, and I get that, because like when you feel genuinely like outcast or isolated from the rest of society and treated poorly and bullied, or not like everybody else, and that's the natural human response. It's like, all right, I'm going to show them, I'm really going to get them, but that's kind of the spirit of the thing.
I was thinking of it from a completely different angle, because in that book that I'm reading, he was talking about how we're in a different version of honor-shame culture now, and the more honorable people feel is the currency of the day is victimhood. Like, if you can prove that you're being oppressed and you're a victim, then
you can rise above.
Yeah, you're due all this honor. And so it's always this race to the bottom of who's the lowest on the social ladder, who's the most marginalized, who's the most hated and bullied and picked on. And that's why it feels like gaslighting. I'm going to gaslight the social sphere and get people mad at me so that I can say, see, See how we're treated. We're victims. Like, victimhood is the new currency. But the thing that I've noticed, because even the Me Too movement is folding in on itself as more false accusations get exposed, as more plots and plans to take dudes down get exposed. It's so clear that at every turn these issues are about provoking a response so that you can claim you're a victim of some kind, that you're sort of cast out. And that's why it feels like gaslighting to me, where that's the currency of the day. Well, the best way to get that currency is to get people to attack me. And that's why it doesn't feel genuine. It doesn't feel like it's done in good faith. It feels like manipulation. We're manipulating the cultural discussion. Because I have to say, if I was in that position and I wanted culture to accept me, I wanted people to embrace me and tolerate me and listen to me, this is not the route I would take. This is gas on a fire. This is, I'm going to make the people that don't like my group dislike us even more. We're cauterizing the separations between us and making it even harder, as Russell Brand said in the one video, to have cartilage between us. Like, this, you're just cauterizing that. You're making it so hot that the dividing lines are getting deeper and deeper because everyone wants that currency of victimhood. And that's a great way to get it, is to motivate the side that you know doesn't agree with you to attack you, try to shut you down. So then there were bills 8 months ago, right, trying to ban these parties, trying to ban these things. And boy, does that look good in the headlines, right? Republicans are trying to ban drag queens. It just all feels like it's all part of the plan. It's all some weird propagandistic narrative of, well, if we can make it look like one side's trying to get rid of the other side, well, then that's good for us. That wins us votes. That wins us social points. That wins us the honor. The honor of the day is to be a victim, and then you can shame the other side for making you one. Yeah,
and then you're the moral winner. You're the winner of the moral high ground when you are a victim. You know what I mean? But it's all BS. Because there is no moral high ground. I keep coming back to that. There is no moral high ground. We're all human beings. We're all prone to sin. We're all prone to selfishness. We all want to look better than everybody else. We all want to be more powerful than everybody else. We all want to have more status and friends and reputability. And it's just a big dance. And it's a big peacocking among people. Millions and billions of people peacocking out there on social media and in the media, wherever you can get heard, and society has inflamed it. Has inflamed this thing, this defect in our nature. And the Christian response is humility. I have to always engage people with humility. You're not coming from a moral high ground. You've been given a reprieve. There's a big difference there. You think about this. Let's say, you cheated really bad on your taxes for years and years and years and years. The IRS comes after you, and you made a lot of money during that time. The IRS comes after you and you owe them $1.5 million, or you have to spend 15 years in jail. I'm making up numbers here. And you don't have the money to pay them. So you have to go to jail. You have to appear before, a judge and get sentenced to go to prison for 15 years for tax evasion. And you're standing before the judge and you're utterly convinced that that's your lot, you know what I mean? And then all of a sudden the judge lets you off. Not because of anything awesome you did, but because he's having a day where he just feels like he wants to pardon someone, And so you did nothing to deserve it, but you get out of that situation, you know what I mean? And you had embraced going to prison for however many months, years, whatever the trial was going. You know what I'm saying? Like, this cloud had been hanging over you, and then all of a sudden you're free. What kind of position are you going to take? Like, how are you going to feel? What are your human interactions going to look like that day? It's like Fight Club when Brad Pitt's holding that guy at gunpoint and then he lets him go, and then Ed Norton's like, "What in the world are you doing?" And he says, "That guy's going to have the best day of his life tomorrow." I'm helping him. You know what I mean? It's totally twisted, but it's similar concept. Right. You're going to be humbled because you're going to be like, "Oh my gosh, I'm a criminal and I got set free. I didn't do anything. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
There's a humility in that. There's no moral high ground. So like hating on drag queens, hating on someone who has an alternative perspective, there's no room for that in our worldview, and I know that there's a political war and a spiritual war being fought. We still have to remain humble. We still have to remain kind in presentation while still clinging to truth.
Yeah.
That's my takeaway.
Yeah, the last word I would say is, I was going to say that, but you said it, so I'm not going to say that. I was going to say the call to Christians would be to not have that moral high ground, but also to not be provoked. Don't fall for the cultural gaslighting that happens.
Yeah.
And
don't react in anger.
Engaging with culture should not seek to clean it up morally. That's not the goal. It would be foolish to go to an apple tree and say, well, I don't want apples on this tree. I don't want an apple tree. And start chopping all the apples off and start stapling oranges to it. Well, that wouldn't change the tree. It wouldn't change the essence and the nature of that tree. Apples would continue to grow on it. And I think so often we go to a person or to groups of people and we want to push against the moral issue. Like if you could get them to not do that thing that you're disagreeing with, that would somehow
the world would be a better place.
Yeah, that would somehow fix them. And it's like, even if you got some moral acquiescence, which you're not going to, but let's imagine that you do, that's not the heart of the matter. That isn't. You're not chopping at the root. If you want that tree to be different, you have to chop it down at the root and plant a new one. And people need a new heart. They have a heart of stone. You're not getting anything from moralizing culture. And so much battle and sweat and energy is spent doing that. Getting gaslit, reacting and responding, and trying to make the culture look more moral. And I think that's so anti-gospel. I think it's one of the reasons that it doesn't work. You're not attacking the heart. You're not speaking to people's hearts. You're trying to modify public, I guess, cultural behavioral norms. And it's just a fool's errand. And I think we're falling for it so often. We're getting gaslit. We're getting drug into debates instead of engaging with love and compassion and trying to have conversations to get at the heart. And that would be my call.
You say we. You're referring to Christians. You're not referring to conservative people politically. We're talking about Christians.
Right. Yeah. And so often in the West, those two things are blurry. Conservatives
and that's the problem I've always had. I've always had a problem with that.
Right.
Yeah. And
my call is to my tribe, Christians, those who claim to believe in Christ and they're wanting to spread the gospel. The gospel's not moralism. It's not a culture that looks clean and
it's not a political
tidy.
Party.
It's not a political party either.
Although there are more elements on the right side of the fence and more principles and ideologies that line up with Christian morals and values. And I will say that. But the way it's been twisted into a parallel, and it's just all of it is just for votes. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's just for votes. It's the way that language is twisted. And so many things in our world are twisted. It's all about votes and power.
Yeah.
Aligning, you are not automatically a Republican if you profess Jesus, and you're not automatically a Christian if you profess to be a Republican. Mm-hmm. And people don't understand that. It's like it makes their heads explode to think that.
Yep.
And that's the thing that I always get offended by when someone who comes from a more progressive perspective says that about me specifically. Mm-hmm. I'm like, dude, you don't know that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's always been funny to me, that you're not allowed to dead name a transgendered person, you're not allowed to misgender a person, you're not allowed to do any of that. And yet, I don't consent to almost any of the labels that I'm given as a white straight male who is a Christian. I don't consent to those labels, and I don't think they accurately describe me. And that's, I think, one of the hypocrisies and the ironies of the day, is that we reject false labels, misgendering, and dead naming. And yet, with impunity, they will apply labels to those of us who maybe don't agree with them and have a more traditional sexual ethic or have different ideas and thoughts about gender. Then you're labeled a bigot, you're labeled a transphobe, and I don't consent to those labels, and I don't think that those are representative of my position. But that's why these conversations, I think, are so difficult. But I'm committed to attempting to have them in a way that would hopefully be winsome to people that would say, hey, I expected these two guys to rant and rave about how gross drag queens are and keep them away from our kids, and hopefully our approach to this was different than what many people were expecting, and maybe even modeled a different approach for those who do take the kind of nasty, recoiling, ew, that's gross. Like I hopefully that has been modeled by us for those who maybe agree with us and there are Christians and they just don't know how to engage topics like this. So let's head to the debrief. Let's head to the debrief. If you like this episode, great way to support us is ceasefirepodcast.com. That's our Patreon. And eventually we'll have memberships and stuff live on the YouTube channel. That'll be another great way to support. But for now, that's the best place to head. And for now, if you don't support us in those ways, we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks so much for watching this one.